guys. So, welcome on in. Today's discussion is going to be about the Scream franchise. Now, this is going to be our first little series here, and I think it can be like a continuing thing. Sorry, might be able to hear the landscapers. That we kind of deep dive into some iconic horror series, I guess. Whether it's trilogies or full blown, like Halloween level reiterations. But for the very first one, we're going to be taking a look at Scream. Now, I always have a hard time like debating back and forth what's my favorite horror series. I would say it's a steady toss up between Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream. I grew up more so with Scream, but to be honest, there's a lot of Nightmare on Elm Street movies. So I figured this one would be a little bit easier to break down. We're going to be doing it by twos. So we'll look at the first two and then the next two. And then that way also it kind of sections off the non-Wes Craven iterations. You know what I mean? Oh, you want to come say hi? All right, big guy's going to say hi real quick. Hello. Hi, handsome. So, yeah, we're going to be looking at the Scream franchise, the first two. Hi, Bubba. Hi. Say hello to all your fans. Goo also loves the Scream series, obviously. What's a big baby? Okay. So, I did dive into... I kept, like, a binder full of papers and whatnot from college that I thought maybe this will come in handy someday. One being my horror and psychoanalysis syllabus that had all the required reading and whatnot on it. So, just to be, profesh, this is our little annotated section. I'm not going to like directly quote these by any means, but it's more so like if you guys want to dive deeper into it, you can know where some of the source material is. More just about like the kind of theology around some of the themes we're going to get into. So the first one is Men, Women, and Chainsaws, Gender in the Modern Horror Film by Carol J. Clover. And I mean, I just printed out like a little section. Just this. This one is directly more so about women in horror, specifically slashers. So it's more so about that, whereas this one talks about it in a different way. This one, it more so discusses how women are portrayed a lot as victims within horror movies and just like very kind of common tropes, I guess that could be what it's called. Like the knife being a phallic symbol and stuff like that. Whereas the Monstrous Feminine, Film, Feminism, and Psychoanalysis by Barbara Creed, that goes more into the monstrous feminine, the idea of the woman as the monster within horror, which does kind of come into play a little bit, not with the first one, obviously, I would say. More so like the second and fourth. But yeah, so with that, it's a long kind of intro to it. I think we're just going to dive in. We're not going to be going like scene for scene, deep breakdown of it. We're going to be talking. All right. So, the first movie being released in 1996, directed by Wes Craven, of course. This was kind of after like a bit of a slump for Craven's career, so he was very hesitant to come on board with this, and they had a whole lineup of directors that they were interested in, but he ended up getting it, and good, because I think some of the other names that they had lined up for it, I don't think could have done it to the same standard that Wes Craven did when it comes to horror. Written by Kevin Williamson. This was like his first kind of really major piece that he worked on. And it is starring Neve Campbell as Sidney Prescott, Courtney Cox as Gale Weathers, David Arquette, Deputy Dewey, Skeet Ulrich is Billy Loomis, Matthew Lillard is Stu Macher, Rose McGowan is Tatum, Lee Waddell plays the Ghostface, and Roger Jackson is the voice of Ghostface. Just figured we'll throw those in there. Honorable mentions, obviously. And Jamie Kennedy as well as Randy. Can't forget Randy. So, the basic kind of premise for Scream is a year after the murder of her mother, a teenage girl is terrorized by a masked killer who targets her and her friends by using scary movies as part of a deadly game. And directly quoted as inspiration by the writer for the film, Kevin Williamson, and also it's mentioned right in the first minute of the movie, essentially.
Halloween. Nightmare on Elm Street. Yeah, Freddy Krueger.
Freddy, that's right. It was scary.
Well, the first one was, but the rest sucked.
Halloween, 1978. Friday the 13th, 1980. A Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984. So those ones instantly, sets the stage of what kind of vibe this movie is going to give, because it definitely draws from all of those. But if I had to say which one it's probably most similar to, it would be Nightmare on Elm Street. It was originally called Scary Movie. No conflict with what we know now as Scary Movie. That came out years later. But it was originally called Scary Movie, but they changed it. And it grossed over 173 million worldwide. Now, that's major at the time, 1996, for a horror movie. The genre itself was on the decline. It wasn't being taken seriously. I mean, it still isn't. But it really wasn't being taken seriously in the 90s. It was being blamed for a lot of stuff. And also, it was released during the Christmas season. Oh, stop. You're fine. Which is usually solely for... You're fine, mister. That's usually solely for holiday movies, stuff like that. Horror, not so much. But it did really well. And Vince Vaughn almost had the role of Billy Loomis, but he was too sick to audition. Thank God. And also Skeet Ulrich. It's like a whole kind of twisted tale about how he got the part and Rose McGowan as well. Like, they had to really jump through hoops to get auditions in and get their foot in the door. But it works out. It works out, honestly. And also, Williamson stated that it was inspired by the Gainesville Ripper. Daniel Harold Rawling, he murdered 5 college students over 4 days in August of 1990 in Florida. And he died by lethal injection. So, yeah. There is a little bit of, inspired by in here. But I mean, I guess maybe any serial killer it could be. But that one was directly quoted as inspiring this. So with Scream, of course, we get one of the probably most iconic opening sequences to a horror movie ever.
What's your favorite scary movie?
You have Casey, who is played by Drew Barrymore. Now, Drew was already a very well-established name by that point. If my memory serves me correctly from looking through it in the past, a lot of the marketing and advertising for the movie pre-release was geared more towards focusing on Drew, kind of like a psycho vibe that they made you think Drew's going to be the main character for most of it, and then come to find out, no, she's gone in the first minute. This scene also kind of later in the franchise, it will pick at it a bit, but this scene itself becomes a horror trope after this. The impact of Scream was so kind of just as meta as Scream is. It's making fun of all of these things and then turning around and making new ones completely unintentionally. It also started kind of this trend of major celebrities starring in horror movies, because before, like I said, it wasn't taken very seriously. I mean, even Jennifer Aniston, her first film is Leprechaun, and she completely denounces that. She doesn't like to talk about that, doesn't take pride in the fact that she did it, which, to each their own, but that's sad in my opinion. But for this series to be starting off with such a bang and a star-studded cast as well, it really kind of signifies a shift happening within more modern horror. And also helped to elevate the genre just that bit more by having all of these celebrities attached to it. So the very first scene, when she's on the phone with the killer, it sets the tone for the entire movie overall, lets you know that it's going to be meta, self-referential. It's going to be humorous as well, but also extremely dark.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
When it shifts over into the dark territory, I think it does it so well because it goes from like the lighthearted, like haha weird to disturbing really quickly.
You hang up on me again, I'll gut you like a fish, understand?
The movie also has a decent amount of very super graphic violence, although it's been toned down a lot. Originally, the film got an NC-17 rating. I would love to see that cut. It's got to be somewhere, right? Like a much bloodier, gorier. I would just love to see it. Sorry, I would. Sorry to breeze on through it, but we're moving through quickly. After the whole scene with Casey and she is murdered, it then cuts to Sydney in her room. And now this is where we get established with our final girl. And that as well is discussed by Carol J. Clover, the whole concept of the final girl and what she signifies, what she's supposed to be, and basically what her role is. Because it might seem like, her role is to just survive the killer and get away, but that's not quite it. It's an emotional journey, it's a physical journey that this one sole character has to go on, and it's not just relying on what the killer is doing to her, but doing to the people around her. I highly recommend it. If you're interested, read it, check it out. But I find it odd because there's very clearly two killers during the Casey scene, and then it cuts to Sydney's, and that's obviously the same night because it's the next day where they find out about everything. The news is all at the school. So Billy went from the murder to Sydney's house, which lines up for kind of like a good alibi. But I think this could also be kind of like an insight into Billy's motives behind it, because it's also in this scene where we learn about Sydney's disapproval, I guess, towards being sexual with Billy.
Would you settle for a PG-13 relationship?
We find out that it stems from the loss of her mother, but I think that like sexual frustration that Billy is obviously experiencing throughout the entire movie also goes hand in hand with the frustration or like bottling up this violence that he has inside of him. And it also just very clearly establishes Sydney's the final girl. If we're going by horror movie rules, she's, not adamant about sex. She's the good, like, daddy's girl. That sounds weird. But, like, she has a really close relationship with her father. So it's establishing her as that, but even that's going to, like, change as the movie goes on. And I think it also kind of, like, an underlying tone when you think about Billy coming from the murders to Sydney's is this kind of like fetishization of violence that it's also kind of discussed about in this, how the media and movies in general are guiding kids to seek out this violence or to carry it out in some way. So the very next day at school, the news is there. It's a big circus, and it's that like sensationalizing of murder, something that's terrible, but it's a big story, everyone's going to be talking about it, as well as it sprinkles in Sydney's trauma throughout it all. So like while this stuff is happening to other people around her, it still has a direct effect on her because it's bringing up all of the emotions of what happened to her mom. And in like OG Final Girls, Friday the 13th, Texas Chainsaw, Nightmare on Elm Street, movies like those, the OG Final Girl is like built different than the others morally, like on a moral value. Whereas this new final girl that we're being given, her values are being formed already by trauma. Whereas the final girl in those other movies, like relatively speaking, their life was trauma free until the big bad monster comes in. Sydney's was already bad, and then it just keeps getting worse for her. Sydney already is built stronger, I would say, than these other final girls that we've been given before, while still making it very clear that she is the final girl. Also, just the cast, all together, it really builds the heart of the movie.
Where were you last night?
Working, thank you.
Oh, at the video store? I thought they fired your sorry ass.
Twice.
I think that's one thing that any Scream fan would probably say is there's so much genuine connection between the cast in these films. I would say up until a certain number. But it really, you can feel the camaraderie, especially in this first one. It's just a perfect cast. It's literally the dream cast. So Sydney does get a phone call from the killer. It's while Sydney's home alone, and the killer does attack her in the house. But they're very, very clumsy, and this leads me to believe that it's Stu. Now, the directors and whatnot say that they don't think of, which character is which in the Ghostface costume, They just kind of allude to it here or there, height differences, stuff like that. They've spoken on it that don't pay attention to that. But you can kind of tell a little bit in the first one, I think, specifically kind of who it's supposed to be. But another horror cliche that the series itself references down the line, running upstairs instead of outside. Sydney does that. She has a bit of a reason to do it because of the door in her room that she can use to block the other one. But right as soon as she blocks the door and the ghost face is at the door, Billy pops up in the window, drops a cell phone, she gets all scared. Y'all know how it goes. And that's when we get our first intro to Dewey. He's one of my favorite characters in the entire series. The entire series, alright? Even spoiler alert, when they kill him off in the fifth one, I wish it was Sydney. I'm sorry. I wanted David Arquette to be doing it for the rest of his life. But it's the perfect intro to his character. And it also reiterates the comedic tone of the movie as well. It's what you need in that moment. We also get the intro to Gale. Now, Gale is a very complicated character.
But when I say hurry, please interpret that as move your fat tub of lard ass now!
You love to hate her and you hate to love her, but she is kind of a major component of this series as well. The main three, Sydney, Gale, and Dewey. But I also the relationships that the characters have in this first film, I also find really interesting because Dewey and Tatum, who are brother and sister, they very much have a brother and sister type relationship. She's always picking at him and always bickering with each other like real siblings do. And then Sydney is treated like a sister by Dewey, especially once Tatum passes. But it's a completely different type of relationship. Tatum almost treats Dewey like a little brother, whereas Dewey treats Sydney like a little sister. He's very, very protective of her. And that is also played out throughout the entire series as Dewey's protective role that he always has had over Sydney, at least when she's in. Well, not always, because he is in Hollywood in the third one. And the second one, he goes to her college, which is out of state as well, I believe. Of course, this is all after she pins Billy as the killer, which she gets kind of reminded of multiple times that, well, you picked him wrong once already because of Caught and Wary. And, she basically testified against him and said he was the one that murdered her mom. So as the crimes grow, so does the story, like sensationalizing the news as more murders happen. There's more buzz around it. It's becoming a bigger and bigger thing. Also, apparently, listen, I've been watching this movie literally for 20 some odd years. Never did I realize that it's Linda Blair screaming at Sydney like, "We deserve to know!" I didn't recognize her. That's crazy. Like, very clearly just talking about the sensationalization of violence and also Sydney's role in it, because she does confront Gale at this point. And this is no, this is not yet. There's a few good right hooks in this one. But no, not yet. But they get into like an argument about Gale's perception of the trial, because she wrote about it and framed Sydney as being untruthful.
I think you falsely identified him, yes.
And then Sydney, who obviously, like, you're sympathetic towards her because she lost her mom. She is going through all of these difficult emotions and trying to piece things together, that, like, it could be understandable that a mistake could be made, especially with the wishy-washy story that they lead us down of, like, what happened with the whole Kyle Weary trial and whatnot. And it also just shows other kids' reactions to, like, everything that's going on, and how that feeds into how desensitized people can get towards these types of things. And even the principal, who's played by Henry Winkler, scolds these kids for fooling around with a mask and making a joke of things, but then turns around and also, in the confines of his own office, is mocking it and, like, using the mask as a joke. So even the performative, like, respect from the adults in the series isn't, like, real, it's performative. At this point, also, you get a cameo from Wes Craven. He's dressed up as Freddy Krueger, and his name in the movie is Fred, as the janitor. That is when, the principal gets it. And then we get a introduction to the character of Randy. I mean, I think he had already been introduced a little bit, sprinkled in here or there, but we get a more kind of direct look into his role, the role that his character plays in the movie.
There's a formula to it. A very simple formula. Everybody's a suspect.
And it's him freaking out in the movie store over the formula, how all horror movies have a formula. Randy is also a trope in and of himself. He is the explainer. He's the exposition that we need, the voicemail that just plays off in the background to give you the info you need to catch you up. Even his character within the series down the line became a trope. Every Scream movie there is, even the ones without Randy, there's a character that fills that role of Randy. You know what I mean? They also do quote or mention the town that's dreaded sundown. And it just had me thinking of, like, when does the shift happen? Like, when does it go from intrigue to the gossip of the story to actual worry for your own safety, essentially? Now we're getting to the party scene. This scene is nearly half of the movie. All right, we are ushering in the last act, only a little bit under the halfway mark. So, buckle in, guys. It feels like the movie moves really quickly, but also kind of slowly at the same time, because of the fact that so much happens at this house. And the very first kill that we get of this final sequence is Tatum in the garage. Arguably one of the most iconic kills of the entire series, but maybe ever. I don't know, that's a stretch. But definitely, I would say within the entire series, I don't think anything kind of trumps Tatum's death. But also, like, Stu is inside at that point. Also, like, not showing any care throughout the hours that pass where his girlfriend is at all. Weird. But Stu's inside, so it's Billy. There's also this scene where Billy and Sydney are upstairs, and Sydney is more so coming to terms with her grief and this perception of her mother that she didn't want to admit to, I guess, or she didn't want to see. Because there was a lot of rumors, a lot of different narratives about the type of woman that Sydney's mom was, and saying that she was having an affair with Cotton, not that he SA'd her. She admits that she is afraid to become her mother. So it's the final girl, which is this victim that society sees, this girl that society sees as a victim, which that gets addressed in the series as well. Hi, bye-bye. Hi. Trying to push herself away from the evil mother, which gets talked about in The Monstrous Feminine. Hi. My big baby. My sweetheart. But that also explains why Sydney has been so adamant about not hooking up with Billy, because she doesn't want to become like her mom, or what people perceive her mother to be. And then a whole bunch happens. Billy gets stabbed. Sydney is chased throughout the house. This is all happening while stuff is still happening downstairs. They're watching movies. They get a phone call that the principal's body was found, so a bunch of kids leave. Perfect excuse to get them the hell out so we can get the final act really in motion. And it's basically, y'all know, I'm going to assume that if you're watching this, you have seen the movies, that it's just chaos for a bit. People are dropping left and right. There are a lot of really interesting, like, behind the scenes kind of stories of filming and production for this movie pertaining to this last part of the film directly. It took them 3 weeks alone, I believe. 3 weeks, might have been longer, just to film the kitchen scene with Billy, Stu, and Sydney in the kitchen. Oh my god, I can only imagine. But, as I kind of already revealed, it is in the kitchen that we get the reveal of the double killer aspect.
You're crazy, both of you.
Which is relatively new. That's relatively new that we have a double killers. And it's also like, okay, they even mention it later on in the second movie. So don't come for me if this seems like a bit of a stretch. The repressed sexuality that's coming through in this kitchen scene is intense.
Tell that to Cotton Weary.
Needless to say, I mean, you have Billy, who's sexually frustrated with Sydney. Mix that with, like, Stu's, I don't know, just insecurity, I guess, wanting to be seen by Billy. It's very... it's got a little bit of kind of a homoerotic storyline to it. And that's also an ongoing joke, really, about the first movie in particular, is how it's a little gay. What I do find interesting, though, is that Stu didn't even know Billy's full motive of Sydney's mom is the reason why Billy's parents broke up. And yeah, Stu and Billy's energy throughout the scene is just absolutely perfect.
First, you pansy-ass mama's boy.
Fucking hit me with the phone, Dick!
The violence is done really well, not in a particularly safe way either if you read some of those backstage stories, but it's done so well, and the cast is just so in it that it works. Even the slip-ups and ad-libs that were left in the film, like, they just work so well. But it literally hits, like, every cliche. They even go down to the double tap of, like, listen, that killer is not going to be dead until you shoot him in the head. But yeah, so that's the first one. I mean, do I need to say what happens? Billy and Stu are killed, and a decent amount of people survive. It's left up in the air, I think, about Dewey's, whether he's good or not. That poor guy, he goes through so much every movie. Gail took a bit of a beating, but she's all right. I believe she's the one that initially fires the shot. She fires the shot that gets him down, and then Sydney's the one that finishes, I think. Listen, I've seen the movie so many freaking times, and yet I still am kind of unclear. So, with that, I do want to check out some reviews. We might as well, right? See what people are saying about it. There's not a lot of 1 stars on this one. It's well loved. correctly so. So the lowest rating on this that has a review written with it is 3 stars. So a half-decent scary movie, but once again, actors in their mid to late 20s are playing teenagers, and the effect of the film is totally ruined as they behave and act so unrealistic. While most people may consider this a cool movie just because of the scares and the overhyped irony, there is actually an intelligent plot with a pretty good twist. I noticed this more as I am a writer, and this is one of my fave horror/thrillers. I advise you not to watch this for the pumped-up scares to a very loud soundtrack, but for how a typical who's the killer plotline can be a little better than is believed to be. Some of the characters can be really annoying. In fact, the only one that doesn't enrage me is Dewey. His idiotness makes me laugh and diverts my attention from the other characters in the very slow character building scenes. The direction and photography are very bland. Wes Craven did a much better job of a real horror film with A Nightmare on Elm Street. Here it just seems as if he is aiming at the teen/popcorn market. You'll notice that with these kinds of movies, most of the characters, not actors, are teenagers, and the tone of the film is mostly safe. In the Scream subgenre, there is never any real edge. After this movie was made, many increasing bad movies that were all exactly the same rolled off a conveyor belt in Hollywood. They were easy money makers. Craven knew this beforehand, but deep, intelligent movies do not sit well with mass audiences. The blander the style of film is, the more popular it will be with the majority of audiences. The plot in this one redeems these bad qualities. I just wish for a real horror film to come out of Hollywood. The DVD is in Dolby 5.1 and is letterboxed is also not the more gory director's cut I mistakenly believed it to be. Oh, so there is a gorier director's cut. Okay, we'll have to check that out. Oh my god. This one's like 7 paragraphs. So this person just really loved it. I'm not reading all that. I'm sorry. I think more so specifically the first movie stands alone by itself, but when looked in comparison with the rest, it starts to build this narrative that we're kind of jumping through horror theory in a way. Like, it's establishing this idea of a victim with Sidney, and then in the second movie and the third and the fourth, we're watching Sidney work herself through, not that she sees herself as a victim, but that everyone else does, and how she works through that perception, which is very Final Girl-ish. With that, we are going into Scream 2, which was released 1997. Very quickly afterwards, I believe production for Scream 2 was already beginning before Scream even released. Once again, directed by Wes Craven. 2 years after the first series of murders, as Sidney acclimates to college life, someone donning the ghost face costume begins a new string of killings. Now, the reprised roles in this one are David Arquette as Dewey, Neve Campbell as Sid, Courtney Cox, Gale Weathers, and Jamie Kennedy, once again, as Randy. Introducing new characters: Sarah Michelle Gellar, Cece Cooper, Jerry O'Connell as Derek Feldman, Liev Schreiber as Cotton Weary, Laurie Metcalf as Debbie Salt, Timothy Oliphant plays Mickey Altieri, I believe that's how it's pronounced, and Elise Neal plays Hallie McDaniel, who is like the new Tatum. And this also is where we usher in the script leaks, something that was to plague all Scream productions from here on out. The first movie and the suspense that built up around who the killer was has now led people to, I think breaking a little bit of the artist's trust here, and going and leaking scripts and whatnot. That definitely plays a bit into the story of it all. There are some holes here or there if you really, really look at it. And some parts seem not super well thought out. It's because of them having to change stuff so last minute. Alrighty, so this is sequel rules now. Entirely different from first movies in a series. And Jada Pinkett Smith is our new leading kill of the series. I understand at the time she was really big. Looking back in hindsight, I watch it, I'm like, it's so random that they just chose Jada Pinkett Smith. Although at the time, maybe she was just Jada Pinkett. I don't know. But she's our opening kill. It also provides a commentary on the Black experience within horror, which is something that's heavily criticized quite a bit, especially with slasher movies. Because I think you tend to see stereotypes portrayed in those types of films. A great deep dive into that is Horror Noir on Amazon. I believe it's through Shudder. And it's Black horror creators talking about horror through the context of the, more specifically, the African American experience. Yeah, I highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. The first scene, the murder, takes place in a movie theater. It's the opening night premiere of Stab, which is Scream, you know. They even have down to having Heather Graham portray Casey within the first scene. Like, the celebrity fare of it all is very heavy in this one. Very, very heavy. Also, it shows just kind of like how Hollywood inherently sexualizes everything. Like, it has Casey getting in and out of the shower when that, for all we know, that didn't happen in the original. Because the first time we saw it, that wasn't a movie, that was real life. The second time, this is a movie, even though it's a movie in a movie, you know. But yeah, she gets it in the theater. And it's a good scene. It's a good opening. Stop. So with the creation of this movie, Stab, it's the further sensationalizing of the story of violence, and it's all based off of Gail's book. After this, it skips to Sid. You're fine, Bubba. I know, someone knocked. You're fine. You're fine, big baby. You're fine. So, skip to... Sydney is now in college, you know, going through that experience, and very clearly is having to deal with her own trauma from her mother still, as well as what she went through now. And on top of that, having to deal with the public, their perception, and, you know, just the sensationalization of her story. You know, whether it's seeing Cotton all over TV doing interviews about the trial and the mistrial, or getting prank calls. But you also can tell that Sydney is very aware of what she has to do, and she's ready. With all that, Sydney already is directly going against the woman in horror narrative that she's a victim. You know, she herself does not see herself as a victim, or at least she doesn't want to. I think by the end, that's more so established. And also, it's kind of our introduction into the movies make people act crazy argument that is brought up a lot more in this one. It's the media's direct role when it comes to violence happening in real life. We also get a lovely little classroom scene with Randy in it, where they're talking about the inherent failures of sequels. Now, a lot of people really like this one, Scream 2. It's alright. It's alright. The third one's my favorite, I'm not gonna lie. But I feel like maybe in that scene, like, they're trying to suggest that this one might end up better than the original, which, oof, hard to compete with that. We also see that Sydney's relationship with Gail is kind of starting to change. Like, she tells Randy, like, hey, chill out, she did save us. But she also, at the same time, gives her another one hell of a ringer right to the cheek. I swear. Is it every single one? I think it's every single one. Gail gets a slap. And in the third one, technically, Gail Weathers doesn't get a slap, but the girl playing Gail Weathers got a slap. That's going to make no sense if you haven't seen the movie. It's also at this time that Sydney establishes that Dewey is like a surrogate brother to her. And I mean, you can just tell, like, with their camaraderie and whatnot, he's there to be like a protector of Sydney, especially with what happened to Tatum. He feels obligated to look after her. Gail has also ruined her relationship with Dewey over the publicity of everything, going after like what would be the best story, not necessarily what's the most truthful. It just shows to her like how much she really hurt him specifically, because she doesn't really care about others, but you can tell that she does care about what Dewey thinks. And I think it's because she knows he is such a genuine character in the whole series, that he really like helps to keep everyone really grounded. So the first like real kill, other than the first two that we get, is of Cece. So Sarah Michelle Gellar getting it right in the beginning. Pretty major. You know, you would have thought she would have lasted a bit longer. Completely random that I figured this out. I paused it to go to the bathroom, and it said on phone, Selma Blair. And then I went down a deep dive, like a Reddit deep dive, about how it's Selma Blair on the phone with Sarah Michelle Gellar during this scene. But she's not in the Scream franchise at all. Like, you look up the cast list, Selma Blair is not on there, but it specifies that is her. Bruh, can of worms that opened up. But now, like, we need to get Selma Blair on. But also, this whole scene with Cece in the sorority house, it's very clearly a call to, I would say, When a Stranger Calls, but also Black Christmas. There was also a clear shift in, like, suspense building between the first and second movie, because that was the main critique that the second movie had, was that the suspense building just wasn't there. You know, with the comedy mixed in, it killed off a lot of the suspense that you had. After all of this happens, Sydney is well aware that the killings are starting back up again, and so her and the boyfriend in this one, Jerry O'Connell's character, Derek, which he's a good guy. He's a good guy. It's sad that he, you know, but he's also annoying. So they're about to leave, and as Sydney's packing up her stuff from her sorority house, there's literally a call to action happening. The phone is going off, and she's just walking through, trying to ignore it as best as she can. And she's literally by the open door about to walk to Derek, and she turns around and just gets sucked back in. She is drawn back in to the call to action. And this, of course, keeps her there long enough for her to get attacked, and now she can't go anywhere. Legally, she can't go anywhere because she's a part of it now. Before, she could have left, could have ditched town, gotten out, but now she's really sucked in. Like, after all that is also when the singing scene happens. I freaking hate this scene, you guys. I hate this scene. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's so cringe, so unnecessary. It's not giving... Like, I don't know, were they going for a 10 Things I Hate About You kind of vibe? I can't off the top of my head think of when that movie came out. Because that's what it seems. But it doesn't do it well. It's just cringy and I get secondhand embarrassment about it. This second movie also has so many calls to the first one, reference-wise. The fact that they actually got Tori Spelling to play Sydney in Stab. Because, you know, in the first one, Sydney says, oh, well, with my luck, they'll cast Tori Spelling. We also get another kind of, like, rules breakdown. Like, it's kind of like them telling you what's going to happen, because it always turns out to be the case. It's between Dewey and Randy in, like, this little coffee shop, I believe. And they're discussing the new rules of sequels. More deaths, more blood. But they also discuss the aspect of female killers. The female monstrous. And more so, the monstrous mother. They directly talk about Mrs. Voorhees and that is related to the killer in this one, a mother trying to avenge their son's untimely death. Spoiler alert. Another scene that has a lot of like heart really pumped into it is the scene with Sid's drama teacher, and it also reestablishes Sid's character, because at that point you could tell she's having a lot of doubts, and that establishes who she is within this series and this franchise. Also, I think it's a pretty good representation for dealing with PTSD and that urge to like push people away. Now, we're not going to go too in depth of it, but Randy does die in the second movie, and that death always hurts. I hate it. Randy could have been a long-time character in my opinion, but it also feels like in a way they're trying to kill the rules, because Randy is the rules of the movie. He's what establishes those. And now that's gone. Although they get around it. And they get their way here or there of slipping his character back in. It's also very apparent that Cotton has been affected very differently to everything than Sidney has. Sidney's clearly traumatized by it, and I would say Cotton is too, but he's angry, you know? He's acting crazier and crazier over like the publicity angle of it all. He wants his like 15 minutes and Sid just wants to move on from it all. And even as she says, Cotton, I just want to move on from this, he reestablishes her for her, saying you're everyone's favorite little victim. She wants to move on from that. It's other people's perceptions that pushes her back into that role. And that as well goes into the whole women in horror argument. We also see Gail's emotional development as a character really take a turn after Randy passes. Clearly that one affects her much, much more than a lot of the others. We see that character shift again from the money-hungry, fame-hungry Gail to now the Gail that actually wants to help out. I will say, while this might not be my favorite Scream movie, it has my favorite chase sequence in it. With Gail in the like recording studio of the movie or theater area. So freaking good. So good. But poor Dewey always catching strays, dude. That guy, he was already walking with a limp in this one. Oh my god. But yeah, it's a great scene, great suspense, and honestly, great jump scares as well, with Gail stuck in that recording room. But jumping ahead from that, the car scene when Hallie and Sid are in the back of the cop car with her two security guards, basically shit goes down. But this reiterates the stance that Randy made, that there's going to be more deaths and it's going to be way bloodier. I would say that this is probably the best kill in the entire movie, maybe other than Sarah Michelle Gellar's, just because it's her. But this is probably the best kill of the movie. I would say a lot of the kills aren't that original, but it also is a very clear like effort from the production's point or director or whoever of trying to build that suspense again, because you have the whole scene of them having to pull the metal back in the back of the car, crawl through the front, and then crawl over the killer out the window, which it's good, but it's also extremely trope-like. And Hallie didn't deserve how she died. Sydney, that one's a little bit your fault. She was like, what are you doing? Let's get out of here. You wanted to go back, and he somehow already got out of the car. Like, she was so adamant about, I'm sick of having to run all the time. That got someone else killed. Like, you gotta know when to hold them and know when to fold them, Sid. The final act, you know, we are led to the theater for the final performance, which is literally on a stage. This is also where Derek, the love interest, dies by the hands of Mickey. We're first exposed that Mickey was the killer, and they even said it, like, when Dewey and Randy were having their discussion, Randy was like, or Mickey, the movie obsessed, you know, psycho, But, like, if he's a suspect because of that, then so am I. So let's X that out. But they were right. So we know it's Mickey, but those trust issues that Sid has led to more death, which you can read it more so in a softer way of, like, just pushing relationships to their end, this inability to trust again after such a traumatic incident. But Mickey also, like, manipulates and kind of deceives Sid into thinking that Derek is in on it as well. But Mickey as well wants to be a victim in all of it because he wants to get caught. That's his entire motive, is to get caught, to plead insanity, that the movies made him do it and stuff like that. The whole argument that the movie's kind of been skirting around the whole time, does horror violence lead to real life violence? Or movie violence, I should say. I also think that because after that we are introduced to, like, the head killer, the mastermind of it all. And it is Billy Loomis's mother, Laura Metcalf, who plays Debbie Salt, or Mrs. Loomis. I'll be honest with you, I only know her as Aunt Jackie. And she just got off of doing the Roseanne show as Aunt Jackie for like 9 years and then went into this movie. So it really just kind of like demonstrated to people like, listen, I can do whatever. She's incredible. And yeah, we'll leave it at that. And I thought she did a really good job as well. I kind of wish we got to see more of the crazy Debbie Salt. But it also kind of leads you down this rabbit hole or thought process of thinking about how the societal commentary around mothers or parents and the role that they play if their child turns out to be a killer. And yeah, you know, the big showdown, people die. It's violent. I do enjoy this final act, I will say. There's just a lot happening. But in the end of the movie, you know, as it gives you a classic 90s like pan out with cheesy music and whatnot, Sid is physically walking away from the story. You know, like everything's happening, all the news vans, all the police are all over there, and she's walking away from it all. Whereas Cotton, who helps Sid survive this, I would say, and also helps Sid with her trust issues a bit. Cotton is deciding to walk away with the story. He alludes to the cameras that like, hey, listen, I'll tell you what happened, but for a price. And Sid is walking away from it. So I think it's obviously very different how the characters are dealing with this now similar trauma, but Sid has other trauma attached to this that Cotton doesn't. So, you know, of course, he just sees it as like an opportunity. So with that, we will check out the reviews for the second one. I'm eager to see what it might say. So the top critical review, 3 stars, and it says, just okay. Scream 2 is just okay. The original Scream is so much better. Love it. And then the highest rated one, 5 stars. My daughter had heard about this movie. I hadn't seen it in about 20 years, but it still was entertaining. It was a lot of fun to see how much things have changed since this movie came out. My wife and I were constantly pointing out things that were common back then and aren't so common now. My daughter enjoyed the time period in comparison to today. The 90s compared to now? Jesus. This was written on August 1st, 2024. Damn, I feel old. I didn't notice how cheesy some of the dialogue and acting was back then. Yeah. Especially that singing scene. That damn music scene. Freaking terrible. Anyways, you guys. So, this is going to conclude our first deep dive into the Scream franchise. The next video, we will be talking about the 3rd and 4th installments. Also, some of my favorites. Now, listen. Obviously, the first one is favorite right off the bat. Just because it's the first one. It establishes so much and it just does it so authentically itself that it's just the go-to. But truthfully, my all-time favorite is the 3rd one. So that'll be fun to talk about. But the 3rd and 4th, honestly, great films. Except the beginning of the 4th one. I don't like that. But we'll get into it. Thank you so much for watching, you guys. I truly do appreciate you. Especially if you stuck around. I know this is going to be a long one, but yeah, thank you so much. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Like and subscribe, all of that. I am going to be going to the Silver Scream Con. That's like early September, I believe. There'll probably be another one of these or 2 more of these before that comes out. But I am going to be meeting some of the screencasts there. So that'll be cool. I'll insert something if I do it, but I'll probably do another like little sit down talk about it. For sure, going to do the photo op with David Arquette and Jamie Kennedy. Also Lee Waddell. He is going to be there, the original Ghostface. Going to try to do autographs as well from them. Now, I know I said that I wasn't able to get a photo op with Art the Clown, because he's going to be there as well. Well, in costume, Art the Clown. Wasn't able to get the solo one, but they still had tickets for the entire cast in costume. So, I just did that. Got that one ahead of time. So it's Art the Clown in costume, and then girl that played Lori, I believe that was her name, the little boy, and then the little clown girl. She's also going to be in costume. So that's cool too. I'm down for that. But yeah, thank you so much once again, guys. And I will catch you in the next one. Take care.